We have reached the end of August, the month of compassion. But I think the ups and downs of the coronavirus means we need a year of compassion for the sick, for the medical personnel, for those separated from friends and family through long-term isolation, for those whose livelihoods are under threat, if not completely destroyed, the poor who have become the starving, and in our country, those who have suffered as a result of corruption in the handling of the COVID-19 relief funds. The prevalence of gender-based violence, which in our country is the worst in the world, has grown exponentially too. It is this last which is most worrying, not only because the pressures of COVID-19 have made it worse, but because it is its own sort of virus, eating away at the heart of daily living, which destroys a society from the inside. It was there before Corona, and it can't seem to be remedied. As a Christian community, we cannot afford to ignore this or brush it off by a line in the prayer section of our pew leaflet if we hope to create a civilized Christian society. To look at why we've become such a toxic society in this area, I thought it might be a good idea to look at something of what science says about the characteristics of men and women. Characteristics which God created, and perhaps what God meant when the world was designed this way. There is much recent research into the biological sciences, and while no one fits totally into any category, there are tendencies which help our understanding. Firstly, men and women are more similar than different. The average intelligence is the same in both sexes, and while women have better verbal skills and men better at mathematical logic, it has been proved that each gender can be educated to function well in the other area. Both sexes need good nutrition, nurturing, love, and fulfillment in life. While it has been proved that intelligence is inherited almost exclusively from the mother, it is also true that upbringing is equally important. Mothers play an important role in creating security and self-esteem, but fathers are vital in encouraging children to take on the challenges, growth opportunities, and adventures in a world beyond the safe confines of their homes. But there are differences. Not only are men bigger and physically stronger than women, but there are differences in the brain structure too. Out of many interesting things, I'll concentrate on just two. Firstly, the links between the left and the right hemispheres of a woman's brain are thicker and more closely linked than a man's. And the neural pathways work laterally as well, while a man's brain is wired from front to back. This means that women will solve problems by drawing inspiration from everywhere and pulling ideas from all sorts of unrelated memories which add to the mix. Somehow it ends in a creative, if somewhat orthodox, solution. A man is more likely to focus on the solution to the problem. He will go after it and won't be distracted by minutiae. A logical solution will be, if not the only solution, certainly the best one, in his opinion at least. He also wants to know where he stands, what brand he represents. High school old boys clubs have a totally different significance for men than old girls clubs do for women. Secondly, while men and women both have female and male hormones, each sex is dominated by one of them. Testosterone makes a man go after what he wants, and he can become at least assertive, if not aggressive, if he's thwarted, and is less likely to be concerned by those who fall by the wayside. If you think of Paul's approach to ministry, this makes sense. A woman will be just as determined, but her estrogen makes her more likely to get others involved, so that the end result will include as many as possible and make everyone happy. If we look from this perspective at the two readings read this morning, we can see something of the male characteristics. Last week, Peter was the one who recognized the Messiah in Jesus and was called the rock upon which the church would be built. This week, he responds predictably to Jesus' news that he was going to Jerusalem, where he would be crucified. Peter, in his own opinion now second in command, his reaction is to rebuke Jesus. This is not the way the things are supposed to happen. Yesterday Galilee, today Jerusalem, tomorrow the world. That's the way things work with the Messiah. In fact, Jesus' way will do exactly that, but along a totally different path. And Peter's way is such a distraction from what Jesus needs to do, Jesus actually calls him Satan. The hard destination of death and sacrifice and facing up to evil in order to defeat it through resurrection is not the one-upmanship of conquest that Peter has in mind. And Moses at the burning bush is sent to lead his people out of Egypt. But he asked God to give an identity that he, Moses, could use. Even a slave people need their assurances. And God answers giving a name that is almost a brand. God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. An old boys' club of ancestry, and with a history of being led by the God through Abraham to their land, a God who led them to food in Egypt, and the God who has compassion on them and will lead them back home. God understands the people and reaches them accordingly. Even so, there is a strong female influence which is not overtly recognized in these passages, but it's there nevertheless. During a time of anti-Hebrew persecution in Egypt, Pharaoh's daughter finds and adopts a Hebrew baby, Moses, and his wide-awake sister Miriam gets the princess to accept the baby's mother, to breastfeed him until he was weaned, about 2 years. No doubt the differences between the Egyptian and the Hebrew woman were never ignored, but somehow they managed to include each other and did not stop Moses keeping his Hebrew identity while being brought up in the Egyptian environment where government happened. This, no doubt, was God's way of preparing him for the leadership role he later took on. Jesus, too, came into the world through the normal pregnancy of a woman that God chose, Mary, the Mother of God. She appears throughout his ministry, was at the crucifixion and also amongst the disciples in the days after the ascension. In Luke chapter 8 we see other women, Joannas, whose husband worked for Herod, Mary Magdalene, and Susanna. They supported Jesus where there was a need in gratitude for what he had done for them. Jesus, a man supported by women, was unusual for that time. In John chapter 4, the Samaritan woman at the well was sent to call others from her village to hear the good news. Mary of Bethany was a disciple of Jesus in that she was taught by him instead of helping Martha in the kitchen. Most importantly, Mary Magdalene, the first witness to the resurrection, was sent to tell the apostles. Women were important in Jesus' ministry, and this is seen also in the days of the early church. So to get back to our current situation of gender-based violence, what is God saying to us? We do need to respect that God created the sexes in a specific way, even though Jesus showed that did not mean fixed, immovable roles. Our sin has spoilt much of what God created. It is true that one of the worst evils of apartheid was removing men from their families to go and work far from home. Boys growing up had no role models and in turn were unable to model good behavior and manliness to their sons. It's an enormous debt we are paying as a society. Circumstances since 1994 have not made it any easier to try and redress that huge harm. Women do their best, but a child needs the examples of both parents. However, all races have their violent men, and it has become part of our culture. If God created men as focused individuals for whom achievement is important, then our very high unemployment rate, and with few prospects for any men, particularly young men, it is almost impossible for them to focus and to find goals to work towards. They are open to anything that will give them belonging and purpose. When the most exciting thing available to a poor neglected boy is a gang leader who then challenges him with killing someone or raping someone else as initiation into the gang, that has some appeal to the male psyche, and beaten, overworked mothers and a weakened and hence toothless education system has nothing to counter that bad influence. never mind police and social services being sometimes inept and always grossly overworked. The fathers who should be there are often absent, or else modelling alcoholism. The system spirals out of control in a mix of poverty, addiction, lack of any ethics, and frustration. So anger against someone physically weaker than yourself, namely the woman nearest you, becomes a certainty. Women do need to learn that their intelligence and education need to be given expression, and the lack of assertiveness among many make them an easy target for bullying men. However, protection for and rebuilding of them is still not enough for the huge scale of this violence, and unless we can remove the scourge and rehabilitate our men, it won't end. We need to put aside our ideologies which don't work. We need to be reactive to the corrupt and inactive parts of our government. We need to galvanize the selfish aspects of business to be more proactive in community work. As God heard the cries of the enslaved Hebrews, we need to hear the cries of the women enslaved by the cruelty of the men who are supposed to be their lovers and protectors, and the angry cries of men who are enslaved by a society that doesn't care. When Moses asked God for his name, God answered two things. He is the God of their father, but he is also I am who I am, or the literal Jewish translation, I will be who I will be. God will not be tied down to any defining name. And those of you who know the writings of Richard Rohr and Rob Bell will know the Jewish influence on them, where the 4 letters that we call Yahweh are actually 4 Hebrew letters, Yah, Ha, Wah, Ha, and they are never given voice. Yah, Ha, Wah, Ha. They are voices, they are letters, aspirants, only air, and the air and the wind is the Spirit of God. God breathed into Adam to give him life. God spoke of the Spirit as a wind that goes where it wills. At Pentecost, the Spirit came as a mighty rushing wind. The wind of God is blowing throughout this land in answer to the prayers of the many. God has heard our prayers as he heard the prayers of the enslaved Hebrews. But we need to follow our Saviour to another Jerusalem, to have our ideas about ourselves and our country crucified, and it will be a big crucifixion. But the resurrection will come in no other way. We owe it to our abused sisters to take up this particular cross, so we can move to the promised land of a free South Africa. The month of compassion must in Christ become lives of compassion, so we will fulfill God's vision of a happy country, where men and women will take their rightful place. Their individual gifts will complement each other. Children will be truly blessed, and above all, God will be glorified. Amen.